Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. I am so excited to have you here. Today, we are talking about game jams, how to actually get started, how to build a team, and what to do once you finish the jam in this community-oriented episode.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
I gotta start making sure everybody in the audience dances to that jingle every time we start. All right, in our live magical podcast, we give game developers in the industry the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host in our Discord every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. There are links to join down below. I am your host, as always, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy, a longtime game designer in the industry, and the Purple Wizard if you saw me at GDC this year. Today, we are doing a community-oriented episode. We actually had a guest who unfortunately has a sick child that they had to bring to the hospital, which is scary. So let's send prayers out to those who need them. And instead, we're going to pivot today and talk about game jamming. So game jamming is one of those things, if you've listened to even a single episode of ours on this podcast, you've probably heard us talk about game jams. For the uninitiated or for those who don't know, a game jam is essentially a hackathon. If you've heard that term, you got a short period of time to make a game. That's really all it means. The sort of traditional way to do it is that you have 48 hours, 2 days to make a game. And usually you'll get some kind of theme or rule or something like that before you start. So for instance, back in the day, I did a game jam. What was the theme? Oh, the longer it goes, the worse it gets. And I did that game jam with my brother, who's also a game developer. He currently works over at Meta on Meta Horizons. And we built a game called Honey Talks Hatchback Stunt Simulator 2.0, which was essentially, imagine like Goat Simulator, but cars. And every time you died, it saved all of your actions and then created a ghost of you that could kill you, that would then play forever. So slowly, your entire world would fill with your past failures. It was a lot of fun. So that is a game jam. The whole idea, there's really a bunch of ideas that come together in a game jam. There's a bunch of reasons that we love game jams, and there's a bunch of reasons that we mention them as one of the main ways for you to gain experience. And also one of the main ways for you to just play and enjoy yourself and get into game development. And some of those reasons are, number one, this is the biggest one, you are forced to finish your game within a specific time box. A common problem that happens to developers of all makes and sizes is that we choose a time box for our game and then we don't hit it. For solo developers as well as teams, but definitely those solo or junior devs, we tend to go, well, I just need that one extra thing. I just need that one more feature. I just need to make it a little bit better. Oh, it's not quite ready yet. And then we keep working on our game that was supposed to take 6 months for literally 4 years. That is not an anecdote. My brother, this game developer that I was just talking about, worked on a 2D mobile game that was supposed to take 6 months, and it took him 4 years to release it. It's very common. So the first thing that is very valuable about a jam is just that you actually have the time box, and there are external factors holding you to that time box. There is no pushing back. It must be done. I had an interview on this very podcast with the Coin Crew Games folks. You should go check out that episode. Where we talked about how when they hire, they actually look for people with game jam experience for this very reason. Because it shows an aptitude in sticking to a time box, and not just sticking to the time box, but there's a bunch that comes with that. The biggest part of it is figuring out what the hell to do when you aren't ready to stick to the time box. We don't even have gameplay left or ready, and we're submitting tomorrow. What do we do? That's a huge part of game development, even in professional spheres. In a AAA environment with millions of dollars on the line, you will still be like, well, shit, I guess we're just cutting all these features that we wanted because we just don't have time. That is a super normal part of game development and is one of the things you're going to get practice with game jams. The last reason that I love game jams, or maybe there's a couple more reasons, but the last big category maybe, is because it's incredibly wonderful practice. You get to try out new games, you get sort of a fresh perspective, and you get to just like play and have fun. It's a wonderful break from whatever you're doing in your regular day-to-day life. You also get to prototype and experiment. There's been a number of games that have come out of game jams that have turned into final games, which we'll try to talk about a little bit here today. One of the most famous ones is Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight actually started as a game jam. For those who don't know, Hollow Knight is essentially like a 2D indie Dark Souls, where you play a beetle who beats the crap out of everything, and you discover mysterious lore about this universe and all kinds of cool stuff. Highly recommended. It's a great game. But Hollow Knight actually started as a game jam. It was a very different game, but the character, that little 2D beetle that is so iconic, came out of the jam. They liked him. They built him into a different game. They wound up releasing Hollow Knight. So game jams are just phenomenally valuable in so many different ways. It's a time for you to practice sticking to deadlines and triaging. It's a time for you to just experiment with new ideas that might turn into full games. It's a chance for you also to gain experience yourself, just like building games, period. You get to work on a different kind of game. You get to build a different kind of infrastructure, and you get to do it at this sort of mad dash speed. I personally, when I jam, I don't sleep, which like ruins me after the jam. But during the jam itself, I kind of love being in that like unslept fugue state. So that's my intro to game jams and why we love them. When we were talking about what to discuss here today in this community episode, one of the topics that got brought up by Misha in the audience there was game jams, which is sort of interesting. I myself have done them for so long that I don't think of them as like complicated. I'm like, yeah, a jam. I could just go join one and then I'll do it. But for many people, they're intimidating, or for other reasons, they may be hard to actually set up. So there's three main things that we're going to cover today, and we're going to call up different audience members to try to cover them. The first one is how to build that team, how to form a jam, how to find people to work with. The second one we're going to cover is how to do a jam well, how to build an amazing game. And then the last one is what to do after the jam. You've now finished the jam. What's next? Do I just stop working on this forever? Do I do something else? So I think I will actually call good old reliable Rick to the stage because we just completed a jam last weekend. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Rick, on that first question. Why don't you give us like an intro to who you are and then tell us about finding a team for your jam?
All right, I'm Rick Williams. I am the founder of Landline Games. I do contract and independent game development. So I will find businesses that want jams, they want games built or interactive experiences, and I'll work with them to figure out their goal for the game that they want created, and then I'll build them an action plan and we'll get it made. I've recently worked on the IGA Mega Jam where we made Child of Ruin, and what we did was we put together an organizational chart to organize all 46 of the people who participated in the jam, and so that's who I am.
Awesome.
So I really like this idea of like, how do you form your team? Because there's a few different ways that a team will come together at a jam. Most of the time, if you're not well connected, you're just going to show up to a jam site or to a random Discord server and just be like, "Hey guys, I want to make a game. What's up?" And so in that situation, it's very much a pickup team. So depending on how many people there are in the jam, if there's 10 people, you might form one or two teams. If there's 30 or 40 people, it could go up to 8 teams where you get a bunch of people, and it's just kind of in that process. Usually what happens is the theme is dropped, and then everybody breaks off into like an ideation phase. And whenever somebody pitches a concept, people tend to gather around ideas. So that's how you form your team, and you just kind of want to build the band, get your engineer, get your musician, get your art person, and hopefully somebody who can coordinate everything.
Yep.
Other ways that you can form a team is you have like a Discord server with a bunch of friends, and you just say, "Hey, who wants to do a jam?" And you pre-form your team, and you know already who you want to jam with.
Yeah.
And you either do it by yourself with that as an isolated team, you already know your roster ahead of time, or you kind of do a hybrid where you bring your pre-formed team to a larger jam and then you pick up extras.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great place to start already. I think I think there's sort of a couple of ways like you're talking about. The first way that Rick mentions is this like pickup mentality. There's so many people who seem intimidated to join game jam teams, and I can kind of get that. To be honest, though, I don't really get it because whatever you do, literally whatever happens, if the game falls apart 3 hours after the jam starts, that's still experience, and it's still a step forward in the right direction. So there's really like no reason not to just join a team, not to just jam. You can jam alone, by the way, totally valid. If you're really feeling like, oh man, I just don't know how to do teams. There's a lot of jams, including Ludum Dare, the biggest one, or at least the most reputable one, that allow solo development and even expects it in some categories. So you can totally roll with solo development if you need to. But besides that, like Rick is saying, I think those pickup teams is really where most people are going to start. And pickup teams, like I get why you're nervous and you want to perform well, and some of those teams totally will suck. And that's sort of the growing pains of not yet having a game development community to work with. So there's going to be a few times where there's some engineer or producer or whoever on the team that you just really don't connect with, or really isn't performing or pulling their weight or whatever. There's got to be some issue that is interdisciplinary, that is between team members, that has nothing to do with the game itself, and that part sucks. But once again, literally whatever happens, that is valuable experience. You now know how to handle somebody like that a little bit better. So those pickup teams, I think, are the way to start. You can do pickup teams a bunch of different ways. If you're doing any of the jams from itch.io, which is one of the most common places to find a jam just on a daily basis, go to itch.io/jams. There are a million jams in there. If you go to any of those jam pages, there is a community page for that jam. Like 80 to 90% of them have a community page anyway. And if you go into the community page, you just say, hey, I'm a 2D artist. Here's a link to some of my work. I really want to work with some people. And you'll probably find a handful of people to work with. I recommend. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I just want to talk about when you're in one of those jam situations and you're like, oh, there's so many good ideas. Which team should I join?
Mm-hmm.
It's the one that you have the clearest vision for what the game is going to be. Like
Nice.
That's your tiebreaker. Just like if one is just kind of like, I kind of see it, but it's very vague in your mind. But there's one where you have a very clear idea. Oh, I know exactly what this is going to be.
Yeah.
Go on that one for the jam.
That is a really lovely little tidbit. That's actually, like, I think, great design advice as well. I have definitely, as a designer, throughout my career, there's been a couple of times where, maybe more than a couple of times, there have been dozens of times where we're talking about the design for some game or another that we think is really cool. We're like, there's something here. We're scratching the surface and it seems really awesome. But we can't quite picture how the game is going to play. That's a crappy design. It doesn't matter if it's cool. If you can't put your finger on it, then you just won't build a very good game because nobody knows exactly what you're building. I think it's a great idea to use that same mentality for team building. If the team has a cohesive vision of what we're all building together, it is so much more likely to actually happen, which is why, by the way, having a strong designer who can set design goals and having a strong producer who can keep everybody on task are both so pivotal to making a wonderful game. So love that. Just finding a team, a pickup team. You can also find those teams in so many other places. Discords like this one. Welcome to the Indie Game Academy. There are so many people in here who just want to work on games, and so many people here who are hungry to do game jams and a little bit scared to. So if you just say, hey, I kind of want to do a jam, anybody else, ? You'll probably find people. You can also find people in real life. If you're going to events, you're going to meetups, things like that. Just ask around. Those team members who are going to be the very best, in my opinion anyway, are those who you know in some capacity. Even if you have a sort of tertiary relationship with them, it really helps to know who they are. And maybe the last piece of advice I'll give you before we keep talking, Rick, is put that team together yourself, meaning take the responsibility for making sure it actually happens. It's really easy for you to be like, well, I don't really want to be the leader, or that's not what I want to practice, or like it seems like somebody else is the leader, or whatever. Like the whole term of leader is even kind of silly. Regardless of who is doing what, you personally, yourself, take the responsibility for making sure that team stays together and that the game actually happens. Ping people, be 20% annoying, because the team, this is one of the fundamental problems with jams. Teams that don't know each other very well and that have no responsibility to each other. There's no real necessary reason for us to be in this jam room together, fall apart really often. That's one of the main things that goes wrong with jam teams. So if you take the responsibility, if you say, hey, I'm going to work this shit out, I'm going to make sure that we go do this, I'm going to remind everybody that we said we were going to do this, I'm going to ask people to set deadlines, that'll make it so much more likely that everything goes well. I'm seeing Easy D ask to speak, so I'm going to pull up Easy D in case they've got cool thoughts. What's up, Easy D?
What's up, y'all? I actually had a question that I was gonna, because I know in the second half we do the you open it for questions, but since I'm here, I'll just ask it now. So for the game jam stuff, is this okay? So are these more advanced positions inside of the industry, or are these more so just beginning stepping stones?
That's a good question. Rick, do you want to jump in before I say stuff?
So like Joining a game jam, is that a beginning stepping stone, or you have to be advanced to do them? Is that your question?
Sort of. Is that it? Overall, what I'm asking is, excuse me. Overall, what I'm asking is this a, is okay for game jam? Is this a entry role, or is this a intermediate or an expert role?
The beauty of it is it's for everybody.
Yes.
So when it's going to be open, game jams are usually very good spirited, and people are willing to take in people who are brand new. But
Hmm.
frequently you will find intermediate and advanced level developers who will jump in, and they'll be the backbone of the team, but you'll get to participate in a project that in a lot of ways are going to be carried by the more advanced people, but you will be able to see how a project comes together, and it will help you watch that process from A to Z. So like for example, if you have an engineer who's got 4 or 5 years of experience and they've built a couple games in the past, you'll get together, and they're going to obviously take the reins on orchestrating the whole project. But if you're just a newbie engineer, then they'll say, "Oh, cool, can you do this one mechanic for me?" And you might spend all weekend figuring out something that they could do in 2 or 3 hours. But because you worked on the team, they get the benefit of divvying up experience, and or divvying up the workload, and you get the experience of working in the team environment. And this,
Mm.
this can go with art, this can go with music. What it is it's a chance to work on a project that comes together. So it's for everybody, and everybody has something to gain from working in a jam situation.
Yeah, just to be clear, Easy to make sure this isn't a misunderstanding, or if anyone's wondering this, these are not positions, air quotes here. This is not like a company putting it on. Sometimes it is, rarely though, honestly. This is not like somebody putting out a call to action, like, "Hey, we really need jammers." These are just largely community organized people doing fun stuff together. So there is no title here, there is no level here. It's just anyone joining jams for the most part. Which means, like Rick says, you get newbies all the way up to pros.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I wasn't exactly sure how. Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure uh what part this plays, because like I said, I'm still brand new to try. I'm still brand new of trying to get into the industry myself. So
Hmm.
that's why I like to ask these questions, and get an idea of what it is, and see where it ranks, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, so game jams are largely not professionally put on. Some companies or communities will put them on. What I see sometimes, Playcrafting is an organization we work with now and then who actually does this. What will happen very occasionally is some company wants some new piece of technology to get used, or wants some specific type of game for some specific purpose. Very occasionally, you'll get like a nonprofit that'll sponsor a jam for like about recycling, or something random like that. Or like one that I keep using as an example was my brother joined a Bose jam for the Bose AR headsets they had like 5-6 years ago, where they paid every team that qualified $2,000 to split among team members. So there are more like professional ones that are put on by actual organizations, but the vast majority of them, all the popular ones, Ludum Dare, Global Game Jam, itch.io, those are all just like people hanging out. So there's really very little professional structure. Just people making
Gotcha,
games together. Yeah.
gotcha. Okay, yeah, because when you mentioned the Bose thing, okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I've heard of things like that before as well, and and uh and I'm just thinking like, okay, so for things like that, like what you mentioned with the Bose thing,
Hmm.
I'm thinking is that a a alternate, or excuse me, an alternative in a
Hmm.
way, or something like that. So what is it called again that he's doing with Bose?
So that happened a while ago. That was a game jam.
Hmm.
Um, there are a number kind of like this where it is somehow professionally put on. So we actually did one. Come to think of it, for the Delve Bros. That's my little sort of hobby indie studio. We published an AR board game. And we actually did one for Tailmore a while back that some members of the community might remember, where we didn't pay people, but for those who made the most awesome games, we said we'd put your campaigns in the game. It didn't happen because it was just a lot of work. But it was put on by Tailmore, and community members made content for Tailmore. So there are some like that, but honestly, those are the exception. Most of them ECD are just people hanging out making games.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
generally, yeah. Generally, the only thing that keeps them all together is some organization, itch.io or Ludum Dare or occasionally Indie Game Academy or whoever has like put them together. But for the most part, it's just like, hey, here's a cool theme. The theme might be as simple as like I've seen ones that's like you have one button. The game has to be controlled by one button. Or the theme might be more sort of ethereal, like we put on a game that was just called Positive Impact. We just wanted you to somehow make a positive impact with your games. There's some kind of theme like that that generally kind of ties all the games together. But otherwise, it's just people making games together.
The actual structure of your team is going
Yeah.
to be very dependent on who's on the team, because just because one person does it one way doesn't mean anyone else is going to do it the same. So you get a lot of different experiences.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, because I wasn't exactly sure what game jams was. So thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely. I'm going to send you back to the audience, EZD. Thank you for the questions, my guy. Awesome. All right. I wanted to make sure we got some time to talk about structure, Rick, because I think a lot of people will care about this. How do you structure a team, and what do you recommend? Because there's a lot of options for a jam.
So when you structure a team, you want to make sure that all the bases are covered, right? You need somebody in audio, you need somebody in art. You need to understand the capacities of your art team, because if you have all 2D artists, you're not going to make a 3D game. You want to consider writing, but also consider how important it is to you. And then with the engineers especially and designers, they need to really see that vision for what the game is going to be, because they're going to be the ones who are creating the tools and everything that's going to go into it. And a lot of times that can be agnostic to the musical and artistic direction, as long as they're just like, hey, give me 2D sprites. From an essential standpoint, depending on what kind of scope you're building, making sure that you have an engineer who's built a couple games in the past so that they can just kind of structure the core architecture of your project. That's pretty much will guarantee that your project will be playable at the end. So that's something you do want to look for, and ideally you have at least one person on your team who can very clearly see the A to the Z of everything.
I love that. Yeah. I think you can realistically put together a jam team of any size. We just did a jam with 40 people, which is the biggest team I've ever done. And it sure was insanity in some ways, but we managed it. I think I've also, though, done jams totally solo and had a wonderful time. And that entire range is valuable, I think, in different ways. Solo development is really powerful. I think basically because you get the holistic picture. We had Shaolin Shodan come into this podcast and talk about being a generalist, but having an area of expertise, using that T-shaped experience curve, where you know a little bit of everything, but then you're really good at one thing. Those solo devs are nice because it's low pressure. It's just you by yourself. And then also you get that generalist experience. You get a little bit of all of it. That said, what I'd recommend, if you can put it together, is a team size of probably 5 to 8. That seems to be the sweet spot for small enough that it's manageable, but big enough that you are gaining multidisciplinary experience. So 5 to 8 seems, in my opinion, to be the sweet spot. The other thing I would say is when you're building those first jam teams, because there's a lot of people in here who seem like, I'm a little uncomfortable to get started here. I'm a little nervous about this. What I would say is this is advice for anything you're uncomfortable with. Do whatever the hell you can that gets you to do it. So if you've got 2 friends who don't know what the hell they're doing either, but you like them and you're comfortable with them, just go for it. Make a team of 3. You might be missing a bunch of experience, but that's totally fine. There are games out there that can be built by any team composition. You just have to sort of roll with the expertise you have in the room. So whatever you can do that'll get you to do it. If that's solo dev, you'll be comfortable working on your own, or whether that's working with a couple of randos that you met at IGA one time or something. Whatever you can do that gets you in the room actually starting, I think, is the perfect team size for the first jam. Past that, I like 5 to 8. That's sort of my comfort zone. But hey, we just did a 40-person jam, and I learned a shitload doing it, so it's all good.
What I want to say about the difference between team and solo jamming, if you have your eyes set on trying to be the one who coordinates the team of 8 people, it's essential that you first do your own solo jams ahead of time so that you understand kind of the input and the output. You know that at some point during a solo jam, you have to stop working in the engine and
Mhm.
go into Sprite or Photoshop or whatever art tool it is, make the character and get a sprite sheet back. You kind of understand the concepts that go into it and then what the deliverables back need to be. And then
Mhm.
from a coordination standpoint, if you're trying to manage a larger team, what you do is you just outsource that step to the person who specializes in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm curious. So if anybody has questions related to team building, drop them in the chat and we'll try to answer them here. I want to move on to building an awesome game in a second. But I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with team building. I saw Ro ask earlier, on the flip side, any advice on leading your own team? The advice I just gave earlier in this episode was take responsibility for making sure the team actually happens. That doesn't necessarily mean be in a lead position. That does make things easier. I tend to be most comfortable like in a lead position, which I don't know, maybe that says things about me or something. But that's just like where things just make the most sense to me. Advice for leading your own team. I think one of the biggest things, this is advice. I keep talking about my brother this episode. I got to give him a call or something. But he actually gave me management advice a long time ago that I've never forgotten, which is very simple. Your job as a leader is not to make the decisions. It's not to like make sure things happen. It's not to task whip people, like a little bit of all that, maybe a little bit. But ultimately, your job as a leader is to unblock your team. And that's the advice I really love, and I think is really important for anybody who's considering leadership positions. You want to have some sense of direction. You want to be able to make those high-level decisions. In this last big 40-person team, I actually felt like one of the pieces that I learned from this was that I actually need to be a little bit harder about what exactly the structure is before we start. But ultimately, your job as a leader is to unblock the team. How do I get their magic to shine? How do I get their energy to get entwined with this? How do we get them excited about this game? That's your job. That's my main piece of advice for somebody trying to be a leader.
Yeah, I would say that when you have a team of people, the best thing that you can do in a leadership position is to get everybody on the same boat as far as what the vision is. What are we building together? Get them pointed in the same direction and then help them understand each individual what their role in the process is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then just give them some guardrails on their parameters, saying like, here, you're going to do this, and this is kind of where it fits into the grand scheme of things. And then give them their playground to express themselves and solve problems and take agency over their part of the project that they own.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how uncomfortable people can get with a totally open box when we say like inside or outside the box. It's sort of disheartening or confusing maybe when you're like, well, we'll just build anything. But if instead you say, like for this jam, all I came to the original team members with was, hey, I want to make a narrative RPG with a core choice, a single choice that leads to 2 endings. That was my entire pitch. There was no further thought into it. There was no more flavor to it. It was just narrative RPG, tactical combat, a single choice that leads to 2 endings. And then the entire team of 40 people filled that box. But having that box really helps people understand what they're doing. So I would say like one of the big ones that is another big one that has meant a lot to me for leadership advice is present problems, not solutions. That's a really big one and is really easy to forget. Meaning if you're in a room with somebody and you're like, well, yeah, players aren't really understanding how to do this game. I think we have to add some text boxes and we need to add some tutorialization. Can you go do that? That is like way harder on people and also makes them feel like machines versus just saying, literally, it's easier for you. There's less work here for you. Just saying, hey, players are finding this confusing. What do you think we should do about it? And you can give your advice. You can give some thoughts like, well, I was thinking maybe we could add some tutorialization like this. What do you think about that? But the presentation is, hey, here's a problem. How do you think we should solve it? Anyway, we're talking enough about leadership. I want to make sure team building is okay. I saw one more question about it. What is the first step when building a team? I'm always a team player, but how do I build one? Yeah, I would say it's always easier to join a team versus build a team. I find it more likely that the team stays together when I take responsibility for building the team. But definitely just asking, just being like, hey, just being open and speaking aloud that you are looking for a team is a huge part of how you're going to find a team. Go figure. You can do that in many different online places, many different in-person places. Just ask. Be like, hey, I'm trying to do a jam. Anybody looking for a 2D artist? Or whatever you are. Rick.
My thoughts on what you need to do if you're trying to lead a team is you need to make sure that everybody is on board with the vision, everybody sees the vision clearly, and everybody feels momentum on the project. If you feel that the project is moving forward, people are motivated and they're going to be excited to work on the team.
I love that. Yeah. So I'm going to call Victor up now. We've talked about building a team. Hopefully people have some thoughts on building a team. The hands down, just go ask. That's really it. And if you can't find a team, start with solo dev. It's honestly great experience by itself. I want to talk now about doing a jam well, building a kick-ass game. So Victor here has done 12 jams. Why don't you give us an intro to who you are, Victor, and tell us a little bit about building a kick-ass game jam.
Hello. This kind of funny. Everyone who knows me would find it really funny that I'm somehow the authority on making a good game jam game. But I guess everyone probably feels that way, even people who've won game jams before. Hello. I've done a bunch of game jams. Normally I'm the one forming the teams, and most of the ones I've done is Ludum Dare. I've done 10 of them in a row. And that's the intro.
Awesome. And it sounds like you placed, is it first in innovation for Ludum Dare?
Yep. One of my games got first place in the innovation category, Ludum Dare 48.
That's bonkers. So for anybody who doesn't know what Ludum Dare is, it is one of the most reputable game jams out there. Go do them. They happen every 6 months now, which is tragic. They used to be every 3 months. Go do them. It's really an exceptional experience. And one of the things they do is they rank all the games in a bunch of different categories, which can hurt a little bit, but is a fantastic way for you to learn how to get better. So for reference, Victor placed first out of generally somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 games in one of these categories. So that's a pretty good, Victor. I don't think I've ever placed higher than 7th in one of the categories.
Yeah, it's tough. And, it actually doesn't, your previous ranks aren't really good predictors for what your next entry will be like, because I have never been able to. Well, I've done I think 6 jams since, and I haven't come close to that. So 6 Ludum Dare since then.
Yeah, this is a total side tangent, but I'm going to talk about it for a hot second anyway. There's something to be said for creative projects and the whole phenomenon of capturing lightning in a bottle. Nobody quite knows when it happens. And no matter what people tell you, if they're like, I've got the secret, they're wrong. Because there's so many things that go into it. The last jam that I did, we placed, I think total combined score was 73rd out of about 2,500 games, which we're super proud of. Is the best I've ever placed. That's top 100. That's top 5%, or top 2%, I think. So we're super pumped about that. But that's the highest I've ever done. And honestly, that jam was just us hanging out and having fun and building something silly. And so it's really hard to put lightning back in a bottle. You never quite know when it happens. But that said, Victor, you're an authority figure now because you're on this stage. So get used to it. And tell us your thoughts on building an incredible game during a jam. How do we do that? What are your main pieces of advice?
Well. I think the best thing you can do is put yourself in the shoes of someone who's never seen your game before and try to come up with all the different ways that the player will be confused. Because the number one thing you want to avoid is people not knowing what to do, or not knowing how to proceed, or whatever, not knowing how to score points or what some of the buttons do. That's what I always try to avoid. So in-game tutorials. Oh, also another thing, a lot of people like to put giant walls of text on their itch page or Ludum Dare game jam page and stuff that explains everything. In an ideal world, that would be in the game and not in the form of a giant wall of text, Show, don't tell, that kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, nobody reads text. And that rule applies everywhere. That's not just for your players, it's also for your team. This is why, our GDD for our 40-person team was 5 pages long with 14-point text. because I knew nobody would read, and probably even then, a lot of people didn't read it. Love that. It's interesting how one of the first things that you focus on is UX or usability, essentially, as well as tutorialization. I don't think that's an answer that a lot of people would give. The answer that a lot of people, I think, would give is trying to think of some brilliant or interesting mechanic, trying to make that core loop satisfying and engaging. But it's very true that with a game jam, your audience are your fellow jammers. And if you do your sort of business work here where you're thinking about who your audience is and you think of them as these fellow jammers, you know that when they look at these game jam games, they're going to be spending 30 seconds, a minute, maybe as much, like maximum 5 minutes playing your game. So if they can't immediately pick up the game and understand how to play, they're going to think it's a bad game. Because that's the audience you're dealing with for this jam. So that's, I think, a terrific piece of advice to start with.
And you'll learn that by watching people play your jam games or just games in general. A lot of the time when the big game jam is happening, there's streamers playing the jams. So go send them your game and have a look at them playing it, because you'll get pretty annoyed with yourself pretty quickly, because they'll be thinking, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go, and you think it's so obvious, but to them it isn't. And pardon me for the crude expression, but the one I like to tell all my teammates every time is like, you try to make something idiot-proof, but the world would just summon up a bigger idiot. And I'm not necessarily calling them idiots, but you know what I mean. The sentiment is that no matter how much you try to make something simple, there'll always be someone who doesn't understand it. So you want to minimize that.
Yeah.
Make your game accessible to the lowest percentile.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It is really challenging. This is something that you sort of alluded to, Victor, that I want to give as a piece of advice. This is something that I fundamentally believe for jams. This is something that I learned way back in the day during a global game jam. The local revenue that I was doing the jam at, local place, destination that I was doing the jam at had, I think it was like 30 teams at that location. And the people who hosted that place did a little competition just for those 30 developers, those 30 teams of developers, where they had like a old school smartwatch. This was before smartwatches were actually cool, that they put up for the team that won in this location. And we wound up winning. And one of the things that I learned from that experience was how effective polish is, even during a jam. We built basically Flappy Bird. It was Flappy Bird about surfing, but it was super fun and simple and well polished to the nines. We went up to other games with vastly more complicated tech stacks. There was one game that I like to talk about that was basically like sailing from Wind Waker. That was the game. You're on this 3D sea, you're in this cool looking boat. But the game itself was essentially that. That was the whole game, because that's all they really managed to build in the time period. And yet we, beat them out with our little crappy surfing Flappy Bird game. And that's because we had that game playable, functional, by the end of the night on Friday. Typically, you start Fridays around 6 to 9 p.m. So we're saying 3 to 5 hours into our 48-hour jam, our game was playable. Then by Saturday, end of the day on Saturday, our game was done. All the art was in, music was in. There's a couple of things that we added later, of course. But that meant that we had effectively half of our jam to just polish, to just iterate, to just go actually play test. We did play testing with people, live in our jam. To make this little teeny tiny experience amazing. So my big piece of advice, following Victor's advice, is to schedule your jam out. First of all, have actual milestones that you're trying to hit. And the 3 milestones that I recommend are design done, design complete, functional, the game is fully playable, feature complete, all the features are in, and then release, which is when you've actually polished it. And that feature complete phase should be with at least 24 hours left, depending on the jam length, but should be like somewhere between 30 to 50% of your time span. That's my opinion on how to make a great game for a jam. What do you think about that, Victor?
I think it's a great advice just in general for even for commercial games. You need time to iterate, because like your first version of everything is not going to be that good. And if you don't have time to iterate, like especially in, even commercial game, because I do commercial games as well, and whenever you're forced to release because of a deadline, it's definitely not going to be as good as if you could push the deadline indefinitely, because you can keep polishing, and that really improves it.
The early playtesting is really important, because not only do you get the UX testing so you can polish it and really refine it, but it's also very motivating for all of the team members who are not actively in the engine, because they get to actually see where the game is at. And that's really a powerful thing in a team setting.
Yeah. Yeah, so maximum polish time, maximum tutorialization, thinking about your UX, building a game for the lowest player, not to think of them as a low player, but somebody who may not understand. Those are all great pieces of advice. Do we have anything else for building an incredible game?
Try to focus on the quality in general.
Mhm.
Yeah, just try your best to make something really fun. I don't know. Maybe maybe everyone's already doing that. I don't know, but I see some game jams that they don't have a lot of effort put into them. It's quite clear.
Yeah, I actually would echo that. There's a phenomenon I've experienced in jams where people are like, "Well, it's just a 48-hour game. It doesn't need to be good," and I get that, and that's okay. First of all, if you just want to make something for fun and you don't want to put any pressure on it, that is totally cool, and you'll still wind up learning things. So go for that. But if you're expecting to leave this jam with like a powerful portfolio piece, or a game that's going to place well in the rankings for a ranked jam, or a game that might actually turn into a professional project, you got to be more serious about it than that. And you can't use the time span as an excuse for a crappy game. Hopefully that wasn't too harsh. But I see that phenomenon all the time. Like, well, I only had 48 hours, so like, of course it's not that good. No. A good game developer can spend 48 hours and make an exceptional game. It's going to be a teeny tiny game with barely any of a loop, but that loop could be awesome, So don't give yourself the excuse of not having enough time. Focus on making a fun, amazing game. Make it as high quality as you absolutely can. Child of Ruin, the game we just released for the jam, has its rough spots for sure. But the quality we hit, I am like so proud of. It looks like an Xbox game, like an Xbox original game. The thing, plays decently well at this point anyway, but is fully released. We pushed from the get-go for a high quality release, and you should too, to get maximum value out of a jam. 100% believe in that one. All right, I'm going to move us on to our final topic of the day. So, a couple pieces of advice for making an exceptional game. Actually schedule out your milestones. My suggestions are design complete, fully playable, feature complete, and then launch. The big thing is leave yourself a massive chunk of time for iteration and polish. We failed to do this last weekend for Child of Ruin because we overscoped to hell. So making your scope nice and tiny, just make Flappy Bird, but a little different or whatever, is a great way to make sure you have enough time to polish. Your game is going to be 10 times better if you leave enough time for polishing. Try building something fun and good. That's a great piece of advice by itself. Don't fall into the trap of being okay with it being mediocre. You insisting on it being high quality is part of what's going to get you a job one day, that kind of mentality. And then, have a look at people playing it. Focus on that UX and tutorialization. Those are all great pieces of advice for building an exceptional game. So here's the third category that I want to make sure we get to, which is what do you do after the jam? You have finished your game. You've submitted it to the jam. Hopefully it did pretty well in any rankings there might be. But like, what now? Question mark. Victor, Rick, or anybody else? Yeah.
I have a lot of opinions about that because, the comment I see the most on people's game jam submissions is, oh my God, I could totally see a full version of this game on Steam. And they mean well because they like your game. That's basically what they're saying. But I feel like it's a little bit of a misguided way to say that you like someone's game because not the same things that make a successful game jam game aren't the same things that make a successful commercial release, Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times, especially in my experience, because I've also done that where I take a game jam game and make it a full Steam game. The problem is the theme. The theme is a really good place to get you started making the jam game, but it sort of gets in the way of a commercial game because it's very arbitrary, right? It's like imagine you were making imagine the theme is I don't know, every 10 seconds, for example. And so now your game has to have a 10-second timer thing. And during the game jam, if you execute that, that's fine. But who says that who said that people will enjoy that, on a Steam game, doing that 10-second loop for hours and hours and hours, right? That's not, people like playing that for 5 minutes, but not for 3 hours.
Totally.
So I'd be careful with, transposing your jam into a commercial project.
Yeah, I think like another way to put that is just like a good game jam game, no matter how well it performed, doesn't guarantee success in the commercial market because those are kind of two different needs. Rick, I feel like you have something you want to say in here.
Yeah, so I would say definitely take the finished version that you have at the end of the jam and play test it with all of your friends and family. Get them to do screen shares so you can watch the experience and fix everything that makes you flinch. Like when you're watching them play and you just see like, oh, that's a bug. Like I hate that that's there. Polish it up and fix it. So it's okay to go beyond the actual jam time frame to smooth out the edges and turn it into something that you're really proud to go back and look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Victor is sort of our cautionary tale, and then Rick here is our sort of pragmatic or practical tale, I think. And I think there's wisdom to both of these approaches. I think so. You expecting your game to be successful because of anything that happened in the jam, I think, is a fallacy. If your game is very promising, it totally can turn into something amazing. We've heard of our Hollow Knight stories. That does happen, but it's honestly pretty rare. There's a reason that Hollow Knight is the example everyone uses. And it involves a hell of a lot more than just like, well, I'll just quickly put it on Steam. Whatever you built in 48 hours is going to take about the same amount of time as an actual commercial release, no matter how much you got done during the jam for a commercial release, which means that it should be in the exact same pool of potential options as all of the other ideas that you've considered for a commercial release. This is some amount of validity. This is some amount of testing that you've just gotten by building this game for a jam. Absolutely. And you've now maybe potentially started to build an audience for the game, which is valuable. But the likelihood of that game becoming a successful title is still not that high. So I would say I've got two things here. I'm going to do my practical side and agree with Rick. I would say that after you finish a jam, it's a great idea to spend a couple of weeks, we're not talking months, couple of weeks polishing it up and then actually releasing it to a store. I actually think that's a great idea for those who are in their learning stages and for those who don't have enough portfolio pieces yet. So take your game, polish it up a little bit, just enough so that it doesn't have any of those hard edges, and then put it up on Steam or put it on iOS or Android or any of the other number stores. But those are the two that really make the most sense. Because then you're getting a stronger portfolio piece. It is way more valuable for your portfolio to be on an actual recognized store rather than just itch. And then you're going to get a bunch of basically live services experience, actually fixing your game over time and making it a little bit better and responding to people's feedback and stuff like that. So that's really valuable in a learning capacity. In a commercial capacity, us trying to make money, that game is almost certainly not going to make money. And that is, I think, what Victor is saying here. And so if you are trying to get this game jam to make money, there needs to be far more affordances for, is this a viable game? Than just, well, I'll just slap my game onto Steam. Victor, you unmuted. Do you want to comment?
Oh, yeah. No.
Oh.
I just unmuted. I don't know. Yeah, I like that advice. There's been lots of game jam games that end up going on Steam and do well. Like even from Ludum Dare. They work on it for a month and put it on Steam and it does okay. Sells like $50,000, $100,000. Like that's good for a small team.
Yeah.
The thing is though, it has to be a game that, like, I don't know. I guess you sort of know it when you see it. It has to make sense for a Steam game because a lot of game jam games, like the one I just did for Ludum Dare that just happened, we really can't make that a Steam game because it's just like a small experience where the start to finish happens in 4 minutes, and now what? If we're making it a Steam game, we might as well just start over. There's nothing here you can expand. So I guess games that are heavily focused on gameplay would be better, or like procedural games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just
Yeah, I have thoughts on that. I think there's a set of criteria for any market you're going to release for, and for any group of people, any target audiences you're going to release for. So if I'm releasing a horror game on Steam for single dads, there's a very specific set of criteria that make that a viable potential option. There are expectations that players have when they play a game on any specific platform. If I go play a game on Steam and then it plays like a mobile game, I'm not going to like it for the most part. There's a reason Candy Crush, doesn't perform well on computers, but performs like gangbusters on the phone, right? There's different expectations that players have on different marketplaces. And then in addition, depending on genre, depending on the actual gameplay and some of your inspirations for where you grab gameplay from, if you're using the tactical combat from Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever the hell, there's different expectations that players have for these different types of gameplay that you might add to the game. And then, of course, the genre makes a big difference there as well. All of those things need to be taken into account for any game that you think might actually make money. You need to say, okay, I'm releasing on Steam because of this exact reason. Because I think that my loop works perfectly for the type of player who plays Steam games. And I'm going to make a horror game for this exact reason. Because, the creepiness that we managed to do with this feature works really well for a horror audience. And those like very specific decisions, there are some games that people just make and they make $1 million. But for the vast majority of other games, 99% of other games, they've made very specific decisions about all of the aspects of their game. My point is, in all of this, that a game jam has had exactly 0 of those decisions. And so if you just go, well, the audience on Ludum Dare seemed to think it was cool, so Steam will too. Then that is breaking the expectations that players on Steam actually have, or any other marketplace actually have. You're expecting one type of audience to like a game the same way that a different type of audience as a different type of audience. So essentially, if you want your game to make money, you have to put a good amount of thought into it. This is true for 95% of studios. Occasionally, somebody gets a home run for free. And a game jam has just had none of those decisions actually made. And so expecting that to be commercially viable is a bad idea. What I think is more likely to actually work, and I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on this, is if you go, all right, this game did really well, it performed really well, people clearly want it, and then instead of just slapping it into Steam or wherever, you say, where does it fit? You say, who is this game for? What audience is going to love it? And is there a platform that does exist that this loop can be modified for to fit really well? That, I think, maybe you could actually get a commercially successful game out of a game jam.
Yeah, the commercial success for a game banks on the fact that people care about your game. So, you either need to go through the process of marketing and making sure that people know about it to follow up on it and sell them on it, or you need, like in a game jam setting, you might catch a wave of virality, and if you can strategically harness that momentum that you have, you might be able to turn it into something. But that's going to be very much on a case by case basis.
Yeah, and I think, especially from Child of Ruin, we marketed this thing heavier than any other jam I've ever been a part of, because we actually had a marketing team. And as a result, there actually is a little bit of traction for the game. But the traction is different than like wow, we're about to release a commercially successful title. The traction is not, I really need this game right now, which is what you're really looking for a game that might actually make money. The traction is like, I'm so excited for you guys. You made something, really cool, and I'm proud of you. It's about the team, and therefore the game kind of doesn't matter. And also, therefore, it'll be a lot harder for us to like turn that audience into paying customers, probably, or at least grow it past where it's at right now. Victor?
Yes, hello?
Oh, okay. I just keep seeing you unmute, and I assume you have things you want to jump in with.
Me? No, I'm not muted.
Oh, okay. My bad.
I've never been. I have like a physical hardware mute thing.
Yeah. So here's what I think I'm hearing then. And I'd love for you two, we're going to wrap up the episode, but I'd love for you two to give final thoughts. What I think I'm hearing for what to do with a game jam after you finish your jam is, number one, I actually do think, especially if you're in the learning phases, it's a great idea for you to get it onto a marketplace. I think the main reason to do that is for learning, and then for building a portfolio if you don't already have a portfolio that people are going to care about. I'm 10 years into my career. We're still releasing Child of Ruin, and I'm still super excited to be and to include that on my own portfolio. Still always valuable. So I think for the most part, it is valuable to take your game jam game and release it to a store. That said, time box that, because it's really easy. I did a solo jam a while ago about doesn't really matter, but I spent like months, polishing up because I thought it might make money, and then I didn't. And a lot of us have that story. The reality is the likelihood of a game jam turning commercial is pretty low. So I think valuable to take your game on a learning experience for just a couple of weeks in actual time box onto a store. Expecting it to make money is unlikely, and if you are expecting it to make money, then you have to go through the exact same process you would have gone through with a fresh game. How can I actually make this game really make money? Who can I release it to? Who really wants it? What marketplace is it going to fit on? And how am I actually going to sell it and get people to look at it? And if you can answer all those questions pretty confidently and do some testing and show that there is actually appetite for the game, then maybe you can turn it into a commercial success.
what I'll speak to about actually putting it on a store is there's a very different perspective that you take when you are actively working on a project versus the state of mind you're in retrospective.
Mhm.
So you go through a process and then you realize like, oh, there's all of these things that I should have been prepared for, but like now that I've gone through this process, I realized that there was a lot of gaps in my strategy. And that's something that you only get by going through that process, that when you look back on, you're just like, oh, next time I'm definitely doing this. But if you always stay in that perpetual development, you never get those lessons to look back on.
Yeah, I think that is a great takeaway for everybody. You will learn a lot from just doing a bit of a retrospective and looking back on the game. And that is something that I think you should do. And if your team is open to it, grab them for it too. Let's all do a bit of a retrospective. Let's talk about what we learned from this process. Because that ultimately, in my opinion, is what you get out of a jam. You learn a bunch, you get a new experience, and yeah, you get a new portfolio title. Are you going to get a commercial title out of it? Probably not, unless there's some real like fire to it, unless you're really starting to see people love this game, and unless you have a pretty specific path for where this game is going to be released and how it lines up just perfectly with the idea that you came up with. All right. Do we have any final thoughts on any of the three, or any final questions for that matter, by the way, for any of our three topics for today? So making a team for your jam, kicking ass during a jam, and then what to do after your jam. Any final questions on that? Or Victor or Rink, any final thoughts on that?
Well, I have just. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Victor.
sorry. Oh, okay, I'll go real quick. I put it in the chat earlier, but I wanted to just mention it. That every time I've done a game jam, I've worked with a completely new set of people. So 12 different teams, 12 different jams. And I know a lot of people do kind of the opposite way, where they stick with one group that they're familiar with and all that stuff. But I think it's wise to put yourself out of your comfort zone and work with people you're not familiar with, because you'll learn a lot more, and it's low stakes anyway, right? I guess you probably won't make, like, you won't make, your game jams won't be as successful in terms of the ratings if you keep switching teams, because you know you're starting fresh. But I think you'll learn more overall doing it that way.
Great piece of advice. I agree. I think there's value to both. Sticking with the same team means you can improve the quality, learn the fundamentals of that team. But hanging out with new teams, I think you should continue to do, just like you said. What about you, Rick?
My final thought is I'm going to answer Eris Morn's question. What's the biggest lessons you've learned from the jam? And that is how valuable it is to set a concrete scope on the projects. Like do the jams and practice setting a scope that you stick to. That is the number one thing you can gain from working on a jam.
I love that. Yeah. And just like negotiating a timeline is so typical. I've been in many professional teams now. On every professional team, going, oh shit, we don't have enough time, is a conversation you will have. And so being able to practice that is awesome.
Yeah, to refine the thought, very specifically, setting that concrete scope that your whole team understands. That's the thing, not just yourself, everybody.
Yeah. So you kind of answered this, Rick. I'm curious if you have another answer. I'm definitely curious for you, Victor, and then I have some thoughts. Eris asked the final question. I love this as our final question of the day and how we can end the episode. Eris asks, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from your game jams?
I don't know. I have to think. Maybe Rick can go first.
I just answered it.
Yeah.
Sorry. I thought you were referring to a different question.
I can answer mine. I think my biggest lesson from game jams is maybe like twofold. The first one is scope. It is always impossible. I don't know. I've done this for so long and I still make the mistake of overscoping. It is almost always better to have a smaller scope that is done to the nines, that is done really well, than it is to have a giant scope that you just kind of half get to. So my number one lesson from game jams, and a great reminder every time I do a jam, is overscoping is actually a killer. It stresses out your whole team, and it just means your game just doesn't wind up as polished or as good as you want it to be. So turn down the scope. It's really tempting to think that if you add more features, the game is going to be awesome. But ultimately, that's actually usually not true. Ultimately, a core loop is already really fun when you tack on more features to make it better. So scope down, make smaller is good. That's my first piece of advice. And then second piece of advice is I think like just team comp maybe. and when I say that, I don't mean professional comp. I actually mean more like cultural comp. Having a group of people who are all excited and on the same page about building something wonderful means your jam can't fail. And I don't mean that means you're going to make an amazing game no matter what. What I mean is no matter what happens, you're going to have a great time and you're going to learn a lot. This last jam, I was so satisfied and grateful for doing with the IGA community because it meant that we all were behind our 3 pillars. We all were behind having a fun time. We all were behind celebration. We all were behind being kind and patient with each other. And that meant that this jam was one of the most just like kind and patient out of any jam team I've ever been with. So I think seeking that cultural connection, that cultural team comp means that you're going to have a wonderful time no matter what. And you're going to learn a lot and you're going to build something cool.
Yeah, game jams have creative problem solving, or gaming in general. That's a key thing you have to exercise. And if you have somebody who brings the wrong attitude to a team dynamic, it puts everybody in fight or flight mode, and that shuts down your creative problem solving abilities.
Yeah. Throwing blame, trying to like figure out who made a problem, down what are the words I'm trying to say, like looking down on other people's work, making fun of other people's work. There's so many things that we all know destroy teams, so don't do them. Just don't do them. That's it. All right, Victor, do you have a final lesson?
Yes, I managed to come up with one. Nothing stood out, which may be alarming. I don't know, maybe I'm not paying attention enough while I'm doing the jams. But I did manage to think of one, and it's kind of the thing that I am surprised by the most is how diverse the feedback you get, especially if you're watching people play the game, and the different things people expect and mistakes they make and all that stuff when they're playing your game. And the feedback, even though you think like, oh, we're all indie game devs, we all make games, so most of us are going to have the same opinions about different things, but no, like some people, you might make like you might add screen shake somewhere, and some people will think, oh my god, that's so amazing, that's really good use of screen shake, and other people will think like, why did you have screen shake here? And you'll only see that. You'll see that more when you're actually watching them play, because they might not even say it. You just read between the lines, like them wincing or whatever, or smiling.
Yeah.
So yeah, huge diversity in opinions, even within like such a small niche of people.
I love that. That's awesome. So there's a joke we make. I don't think Gwen is in the audience here, but for those who are more old school listeners of the podcast, you may remember Gwen. Gwen was similar to Rick in that Gwen was in every single episode and asked all kinds of great questions. Gwen is a narrative writer and now runs their own narrative studio. And we, the core team of IGA, will occasionally mention the air quotes here, Gwen effect. Gwen taught us, Gwen was one of our first students, and Gwen taught us that we can't always be nice. We can't always just say, oh man, your game is so beautiful. Sometimes we have to say, hey, this part of the game is really not very strong, and I think, you got to work on this. So part of what Victor is talking about is the diversity of thought and also the diversity of feedback. It's really effective. It's really wonderful to have somebody who gives you a pat on the back and says you can do it no matter what. That's something that we all need. But we also need people like Gwen and maybe like you, Victor. I've experienced this with you a little bit, who are like, that's not strong enough. I think you could work on that. So get you some overtly positive, but also get you some people who are willing to tell you the truth. Both of those valuable. All right. It is the end of the episode. Thank you so much to Rick and Victor for being our guests here during this community-focused Game Jam episode. I have a piece of homework. It's very simple. I want every person in this room and every listener to go and sign up for a Game Jam. Get it on your calendar.
I thought you were going to say, go play your Game Jam game that you just did.
All right, that's the secondary homework. If you do that, I'll give you a gold star, metaphysically, of course. So yes, no, really, every single person in this room, go and sign up for a jam. Go to itch.io/jams. Go to ludumdare.com, go to globalgamejam.org, find a jam that fits your schedule, even if it's 6 months from now, even if it's 8 months from now, find a jam that fits your schedule and actually book that weekend or period of time for it. A few of you are like, yeah, maybe I'll do that later. No. Do it right now. If you're driving, do it after you finish driving. But for everyone else, do it right now. Go find a jam and put it on your calendar. I'm going to do it too. itch.io/jams, ludumdare.com, globalgamejam.org. There are so many options. All right, go find a jam and put it in your calendar. That's your homework. We are done for the day for sure. We've gotten a few minutes over, but it's because we started a few minutes late. I hope everybody enjoyed talking about game jams. It really is like the one thing. If you're like, what do I do to improve myself? It's game jams. And we've already told you that. Why do we have to keep telling you that? Go and do them. Go make some games. Go do some game jams with people that you don't know yet. Experience what it's like to work on a team. Release something you're proud of. Have a total fireball and crash and burn, and don't release a game that's also valuable and wonderful. Remember, all spices of life are good. All spices of life teach us something. That's going to do it for today's episode. I hope you have enjoyed. We'll be back again every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to come and join us for the next one. There are links to join down below. Thank you for everybody who spoke. Thank you for those who asked questions, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who might enjoy this episode as well. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.